I first showed up at WFMU on July 4th, 1986. So next year will be 30 years down there. And the first thing I want to do is thank all of you for being listeners and for being supporters and for being here tonight. With so many entertainment choices, including Rocket from the Tombs at our very own Monty Hall and the Brill Building at Losers Lounge tonight with our own Dave Amell. So thanks for coming out to KGB Board. We do appreciate it. This is a piece that actually appeared on a website called theweaklings.com. They published it not too long ago. I wrote it initially for Aerial View, which is off the air right now due to my foot surgery, but is existing as a podcast at aerialview.me. And I love doing a podcast because I can say fuck and shit and cocksucker and motherfucker. So I'm really enjoying that. That's all I want to do is curse. But there will be some curses in this piece. It's called The Other Chris. And pardon me for sitting down, but I don't think I could stand for the amount of time it's going to take to read this. So thanks for indulging me. There's a cable channel showing Partridge Family reruns. Between ads for incontinence products and life insurance, the tale of the widow Shirley Partridge, her 5 kids, and their musical career plays out to a horribly canned laugh track. I am pulled back through the years, trying to remember what I was like when the show first went on the air. September 25th, 1970, a mere 20 days after my 8th birthday. Part of a Friday night ABC lineup that included Nanny and the Professor and the Brady Bunch, the Partridge Family quickly became my favorite show. I'd sneak down to the basement with something to eat and a drink, hoping my actual family wouldn't join me so I could pretend I was a groovy, sun-dappled partridge in this mythical land of California. It wasn't hard to imagine. The youngest partridge was around my age and named Chris. Wow, that's my name. Played by young Jeremy Geldwax, who looked like a chimpanzee, Chris could always be counted on for some off-kilter remark, but Jeremy Geldwax was not the breakout star of the Partridge Family. That would be Danny Bonaducci, a man we're still dealing with to this day. I wanted to be Danny because he was a smart ass and always got off a good line, and I wanted to be a partridge because, unlike the antiseptic Brady Bunch, they'd snipe at each other, they were sarcastic, they'd argue and fight. Then they'd all burst into a catchy song written by Wes Farrell and some of our finest pop songwriters of the 70s, like Jerry Goffin, Bobby Hart, Tony Romeo, Paul Anka, and even Mike Appel. The 8-year-old me heard I Think I Love You and thought, that's a catchy number. That's how you can tell if it's a catchy song, if 8-year-olds like it. I didn't know how phony it all was. I thought David Partridge wrote all these songs and his family performed them. I watch it now and think, how could I have been so naive? First, they're not really a family. Well, Shirley Jones is David Cassidy's stepmom, but that's it. They're not singing, except for Shirley Jones and David Cassidy. That's it. They're not playing, except for David Cassidy. It's not the Cowsills. A bunch of studio musicians, nicknamed the Wrecking Crew, provided the music. It's phony, baloney Hollywood time. But as I sat there in my darkened basement, peanut butter and jelly sandwich in one grubby little fist, and 12 ounces of Nestle's Quick in the other, I'd think, that's what I want. I want to go out across the country in a bus with my family and play at these weird little nightclubs where everyone sits at long tables. I want us to be a family that fights and argues but still loves each other. When the Partridge Family went off the air, the end was just beginning for my family. My parents fought constantly. My father was usually not home. My brothers and sisters and I were always at each other's throat. And the only musical instrument in our house was a harmony guitar my sister's friend Rodney left behind, which replaced the baby grand piano we had around since before I was born, just as the Partridge Family replaced the original Chris with another. When the show returned to the schedule in 1971, there was a different Chris behind the drums, played by a non-simian-looking kid named Brian Forster. Perhaps they took Jeremy Geldwax aside and said, "You look like a chimpanzee and we're getting rid of you." No, that's not what happened. It turns out Dad Geldwax took a job on the East Coast and moved the whole family there. According to Partridge Family creator Bernard Slade, ABC received, quote, not a single complaint about the switch, unquote. Apparently no one noticed, but I did. I continued watching the show, but I found it impossible to see other Chris without thinking, wow, you could be replaced just like that. And then it happened to me. The Partridge Family had been gone for 3 years. I'd taken up guitar when the show went off the air in 1974, and 2 years later was playing rock and roll covers in a band I dubbed Cobra, formed by my friend Billy and me. From Steve Miller to the Rolling Stones to Bad Company, we mastered the mid-tempo rocker. On my white Ibanez Les Paul copy through my Univox amp, I put out quite a racket, playing rhythm and lead. It was the only thing I felt proud of. Pride goeth before a fall. Cue Chris Anderson, the other Chris. My brother Mark brought him in. I'm not sure how they met. It couldn't have been school. Chris Anderson was a dropout. My brother was headed that way, but he was still in school. Maybe they met at a party on Gilgo Beach. They were both in the boats, as were most of the people I knew growing up on the South Shore of Long Island. The Great South Bay was a few blocks from us, but I had little to no interest in anything involving water. You could drown there. My brother and other Chris probably started talking about propellers or bilge pumps or cavitation plates, and before long they're hanging out, drinking beer and ogling girls. Then the party moves to our house, where Chris Anderson can be found every day. I dimly recall something about his parents throwing him out. I think he was smoking pot and drinking. Mark somehow convinced my mother to let him move into the storage shed my father built in our backyard. When I say shed, please don't picture one of those tiny prefab structures for sale at the Home Depot. This was a 2-story wood frame building with a foundation. It had no heat or running water, but my father did wire it up with electricity. Downstairs held the lawnmower and all the other implements needed to maintain a suburban home. Upstairs was a big empty room that had been carpeted and paneled. I'm not sure what it was intended for, but once my parents got divorced and my father moved out, my oldest sister Diana moved in with her boyfriend Keith. They lived there for a few years, then got an apartment in town. Then Mark took it over. My mother had gotten a job, but she made a few extra bucks charging her children rent to live at home. If you're 18, you could pay rent or you can leave. She did the same with Chris Anderson, though I have no idea if he was 18. He looked 35. Tall, sinewy, very tan, with a bulbous nose, page boy haircut, and bad acne scars. He looked like the love child of Carl Malden and Mowgli from the Jungle Book. And like Mowgli, he went shirtless most of the time, which was a reproach to the overweight me. The worst part of having other Chris around, of course, was that I lost exclusive rights to my very own name. From the moment he moved in, whenever anybody else would say, Chris, I'd have to ask, which one? In my own house, with my own family. My mother would call, Chris! And my response wasn't, what? It was, which one? Only to hear, not you, other Chris. My mother and other Chris became fast friends. She'd come home from work and he'd mix her up a screwdriver or a vodka tonic and bring it to her in the living room. I'm sure he was mixing one up for himself, too. He seemed to be drunk more nights than not. They'd joke and laugh, and I'd wonder to myself, does she actually prefer this guy to me? I don't know where other Chris came from, but his people must have hunted their food because he was always killing something. He'd go fishing and come back with a half a dozen or more flounder. From our back window, he'd fire his Benjamin air rifle into the trees by the barn, and out would drop a pigeon. I found one once in our freezer wrapped in aluminum foil. I don't know what I thought I was looking for, but in the freezer I found squab. The next day, Chris Anderson cleaned the bird, dressed it, and fried the meat in a pan. There wasn't much meat. Fuck you, you whale! Who said you could speak to me like that? Why? What are you going to do about it, whale? I looked to my brother Mark. He walked away. Other Chris stood there and asked, now what? Now what, indeed? I didn't know how it came to this. I didn't know how it happened that I was about to fight other Chris, but it seemed I had to. I couldn't back down now. Why did we hate each other so much? It started out okay. He'd stay out in the barn, only come in to use the bathroom or the kitchen, but then he would hang out in the basement, which is where I'd taken to sleeping and satisfying certain urges. You know which urges, like the ones I felt when I'd see Shirley Jones's cleavage. Chris Anderson was thwarting my urges and their satisfaction, and my mother clearly favored him. She was always laughing when she spoke with him. Me, not so much. The last straw was the name calling. Whale, fat boy, blimp, and so many more. It led us to this, the other Chris and I, standing at the back door, staring daggers at each other. He motioned for me to go through the door first. Then he hurried out after me, shoving me down the back steps. I stumbled. He grabbed my coat and tugged it down, pinning my arms to my sides. Then other Chris proceeded to pummel me. I fell down in the yard. He kicked me several times and left me there struggling to get the coat off. When I finally pulled myself back inside, other Chris was gone, and my mother had left her bedroom in the tractor beam glow of her Sony Trinitron to stomp into the kitchen and yell, "What the hell just happened? Chris Anderson beat me up. What did you do to provoke him?" "What did I do to provoke him? Why would he want to beat you up? Because he's an asshole?" Things were different after that. I made sure I was out of the house as often as possible. I avoided other Chris. Occasionally our paths would cross, and it would be oddly cordial and deeply unpleasant. Before much longer, he was gone. The subject of other Chris came up a few years ago at Thanksgiving. I don't know who mentioned his name. It might have been me. My sister said, "I saw him wandering the streets of Lindenhurst years ago. He did not look good." "He's an alcoholic," my brother added. I told the story about him shooting the pigeon and putting it in the freezer. My mother laughed. "He was always a pleasure to have around." I was shocked. "Do you know that I felt replaced by him? Do you remember he beat the crap out of me?" My mother stopped laughing and quietly said, "I was drinking back then." I don't know if other Chris is alive or dead. I do know that if it ever looks like I'm going to be in a fight, I'll invite my foe to step outside before me, kick him down the steps, and pull his jacket down so he can't move his arms. Then I'll proceed to pummel him senseless.